Good day, my friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Daily Torah broadcast, a ministry of the Messianic Discipleship Institute. Remember, you can always visit us online at mymdi.org and download previous episodes of the Daily Torah podcast. Contact us and let us know what you're learning so far. Today we are on day 2 of this week's Daily Torah series called Shelach, which means send. Yesterday we concluded on day 1, and today our Torah portion opens with God sending men to spy out the land of Canaan. If you have your Bibles and notepads handy, get them ready or listen and review later. But let's pick up the story in Numbers chapter 13, beginning in verse 17. In Numbers chapter 13, verse 17, we read, "Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, Go up this way into the south, and go up to the mountains, and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Now, my friends, Moses' direction to the spies was a subtle example of unbelief. When God first commissioned Moses, he told him that the land was a good and large land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Moses told Israel that it was a good land. There is at least a small sense here that Moses sent the spies to see if God was truthful in describing the land. Nevertheless, this was an entirely reasonable thing for Moses to do, and it reflected the curiosity of all of Israel. After all, they had never seen this land, nor had almost any Israelite for some 400 years, since the time of Jacob. Asking them to report back whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak was a dangerous question to ask. If they thought the people of Canaan were strong, they might be afraid to go into the land and conquer them. If they thought they were weak, they might enter trusting in their own strength. Now continuing in verse 25, it says, "And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and they showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Great, my friends. The Discovery Tour is going so well. It covered like 250 miles. It took 40 days. And as we know in the Bible, a period of 40 days or 40 years, the time of 40, the number 40, is often associated with testing. But so far so good, right? But then continuing in verse 28, we see why Moses asking them to report back whether the people there were strong or weak may have not been a good mission. Now continuing in verse 28, it says, "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." But then continuing in verse 31, "But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we had gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak there, and they came from the giants. and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Now, my friends, what God had promised about the land was indeed true. The fruit they brought back, the grapes, the pomegranates, the figs, showed how fruitful and blessed Canaan was agriculturally. This is the first biblical mention of Anak in the scriptures. They were a people of great stature, that's true, and they were thought to be fierce warriors. Nevertheless, means despite all of that, the message was from most of the spies was that the land is as wonderful as God promised, but nevertheless, we can't conquer it. They're saying, despite God's faithful promise, the people who dwell in the land are strong. Despite God's faithful promise, the cities are fortified and very large. Despite God's faithful promise, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And despite God's faithful promise, the Amalekites dwell, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell, and the Canaanites dwell in the land, and there isn't any room for us, the people of Israel. Now, my friends, it is hard to imagine a report more unbelieving and unfaithful to God than this. This report recognized the faithfulness of God's promise, the truth of His word, and yet said, despite all that, we can't conquer the land. My friends, if the faith of the spies was tested over this 40-day tour of the land, they failed the test. They didn't believe God could or would fulfill His promise to give Israel this land as stated in the covenant God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. How often, my friends, do we read about and hear God's promises, but circumstances allow fear to enter in and we doubt God can deliver? But Caleb was different. Caleb commanded the people to immediately, at once, trust God, obey God, and take the land. He understood that in the Lord they were able to overcome it. It took great courage for this man to stand against the tide of unbelief and doubt. My friends, let's endeavor to have the spirit of Caleb in our lives and trust in God in every circumstance, never wavering or doubting His promises. Now let's turn to our half-Torah portion in Joshua chapter 2 in verses 4 through 7. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 4, continuing our story of Rahab and the two spies sent out by Joshua a generation later. In verse 4 we read, Then the woman took the two men and hid them. So she said, Yes, the man came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And it happened as the gate was being shut, when it was dark, that the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you may overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. Then the men pursued them by the road to the Jordan, to the fords, and as soon as those who pursued them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now, my friends, the culture of the ancient Near East had a strong tradition of protecting guests. Even considering this, Rahab went much further than these cultural traditions regarding hospitality. She put her own life at risk for the Israelite spies. When Rahab hid the spies, she sided with Israel against her own people. It was an act of treason. The Bible simply reports Rahab's lie. It does not praise it or excuse it. Rahab faced an ethical challenge. Either option was bad. She decided that it was worse for her to betray the spies than to lie about their presence. My friends, Rahab's protection of the spies was courageous. Despite her pagan upbringing, culture, and morally compromised profession, she allied herself with Israel and the God of Israel. Now, my friends, later we will see her reward for this act of bravery. But now let's review our Brit Hadashah portion for today in Hebrews chapter 3, verses 10 through 13. In Hebrews 3, verse 10, we read, "Therefore I was angry with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." In verse 12, "Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin." Now, my friends, God's anger was kindled against that generation on account of their unbelief. They refused to trust God for the great things He promised, and they were unwilling to continue in trust. Therefore, they could not enter the rest God had appointed for them, the land of Canaan. My friends, we often underestimate the terrible nature of unbelief. Refusing to believe God is a serious sin because it shows an evil heart and a departing from the living God. One can truly believe God, yet be occasionally troubled by doubts. There is a doubt that God's promised, but is weak in faith at the moment. Unbelief isn't weakness of faith, it sets itself in opposition to faith. If we want to strengthen our faith and avoid the ruin of unbelief, we must be around other believers who exhort, that is, seriously encourage us. This shows our responsibility to both give and receive exhortation and to exhort one another daily. It is easy to judge and criticize, but that is not exhortation. If you are out of fellowship altogether, you can't exhort or be exhorted. When we are out of fellowship, there is much less around us to keep us from becoming hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. My friends, the sin of unbelief has its root in deceit, and its flower is marked by hardness, lest any of you be hardened. My friends, unbelief and sin are deceitful, because when we don't believe God, we don't stop believing. We simply start believing in a lie. As your heart becomes harder, you become less and less sensitive to your sin. You become more and more distant from Yeshua, and your spiritual danger grows every day. So, my friend, where are you in your walk with Yeshua? Is your sin hardening your heart, distancing yourself from Him? Meditate on these things today, my friends. So let's end it here for today. Meditate on these words and how they apply to your life. Pray for us in this message to go out. Pray for those who are scattered throughout the world, seeking their Messiah so that they will return to the Torah in their Hebraic roots. Exhort one another daily. Share this message with your friends and family. Post a link on your social media pages and help us spread the gospel. You never know whose life you may affect. Remember to visit us at mymdi.org. Take one of our free classes. Download the Daily Torah schedule. You can also order the Daily Torah series of books to follow along. And if the Lord inspires you, please consider becoming a monthly sponsor so we can reach more people with these messages. Just click the giving menu option or donate button on the website. And regarding the donate button, my friends, some people had asked that they don't have a PayPal account. You do not need a PayPal account to donate to us. You can use your credit or debit card. Simply go through the options and you'll see a little section to use your debit or credit card without having a PayPal account. So tomorrow we will continue our studies. Until then, Shalom Aleichem, blessings and shalom, my friends.